Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MIF++ seminar. Today, Flaviu Cipcigan from IBM Research nearby in Dresden Lab, United Kingdom, will talk about discovery of new reticular materials for carbon dioxide capture using GFlowNets. Flaviu, over to you. Sitting right across the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vitaly. Pleasure to be here. Would you be able to turn the volume down so I don't hear my echo? Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here and to present. As Vitaly said, if anyone has questions or comments throughout the presentation, feel free to unmute yourself and discuss. I'll be presenting about a paper that I'll be also talking about this paper at the NeurIPS AI for Materials workshop this December in the US. Start with probably with one of my favorite pictures of the Earth. So this is the planet that we live on, and this tiny little sliver is our atmosphere. And we have to do a lot of things to protect that atmosphere. And a lot of these involve new materials, such as materials that capture carbon dioxide, such as new photovoltaic materials or new battery materials. However, that's very expensive and needs billions of dollars and years of research. One of the hopes that we have here, I think we all have here, is that artificial intelligence, computer simulation can speed this up, make it cheaper, make it faster. So I'll tell you in this presentation about what I am doing and what my team at IBM is doing to speed this process up. I'll start with a brief overview of reticular materials or metal-organic frameworks. I know this is a broad audience, so I will give the background of the materials that we are designing. I will explain generative flow networks or GFlowNets, which is a generative AI framework and probabilistic inference framework coming out of Miller and Benjer's group in Canada, and matgfn, which is a Python library that I and my group have built to train and sample using GFlowNets. I'll then talk a little bit about the dataset that we've generated of reticular materials with high surface area for carbon capture, and talk a little bit about some of the things that we want to do next. So starting off with reticular materials. The basic definition of a reticular material is a three-dimensional periodic material connected by strong bonds. So some call it the extension of the molecule in 3 dimensions. Metal-organic frameworks are a type of reticular material where metal atoms are connected by strong bonds to linkers, which connect to other metal atoms and form this periodic structure. So for example, here on the right, we have a very famous metal-organic framework that is called MOF5, and we see a unit cell of that. On the left, we also see a scanning electron microscope image of one of these metal-organic frameworks, and you see these pores, these holes that are formed at nanometer scale. These are the pores that can capture gases, that can store these gases, that can filter out materials in liquids. So metal-organic frameworks and reticular materials have a broad range of applications. There are trillions of such materials that can be built, and they can be built using an approach called secondary building units. The way you do that, the way to build those, is you start with what folks in the materials community call a topology, although my mathematician friends tell me that it's not quite a topology in the mathematical sense, but it's a 3-dimensional collection of sites. So for example, here you have square sites combined with lines with other square sites. So in each square site, you can add a molecule, which is a square, and you can add another molecule, which we call a linker, to connect it with the other square site. And there's multiple of these topologies. Each have a code. There is a database, and you can add many different chemicals in each site, and therefore you can construct trillions of these combinations. There are a bunch of software, such as pormake, which are used, that allow us to construct these hypothetical combinations, at least in silico, on a computer. I was interested, and the team was interested, in designing reticular materials to capture carbon dioxide. In order to do that, we need a proxy. So we need a number which shows how good a material is for CO2 capture. There are many we can use. Some are machine learned. We used the simplest one in this paper. This is the gravimetric surface area. We see it here on the x-axis, calculated over multiple materials in the Core 2019 dataset. It's a widely used dataset of metal-organic frameworks. On the y-axis, we have the calculated CO2 uptake in moles per kilogram. So how much CO2 is absorbed by this material in the units of moles per kilogram. And we see a good correlation with this parameter. The higher the gravimetric surface area is, the higher the CO2 uptake tends to be. Gravimetric surface area is easy and quick to calculate. CO2 uptake requires simulation. So for our first study, we used this. The goal was to design new MOFs with high gravimetric surface area. To do that, we used an emerging generative AI framework, an emerging probabilistic inference framework called generative flow networks. From the reference above, I'm going to take the image to explain how GFlowNets work. This is taken in the context of small molecule generation. You start with an empty state, so no atoms, and you can choose to add one fragment or another fragment to this empty state. Then to each fragment, you can choose to add more fragments, and you eventually construct a molecule, and the algorithm eventually chooses a termination action. So at every step, the algorithm sampled over possible molecular fragments up until it samples a termination action. Once it samples a termination action, it sends that molecule to another piece of software, which calculates a numerical reward. In our case, the numerical reward was the gravimetric surface area. The fragments were secondary building units of metal-organic frameworks. The GFlowNet main theorem guarantees that after training, the GFlowNet will sample objects in proportion to the reward function. If the reward function is low, you'll get less of those objects being generated. If the reward function is high, you'll get more of those objects generated. In our case, as I said, we use the gravimetric surface area. We also put a cutoff, so the reward was 0 below 5,000 grams at 5,000 square meters per gram. So you only generated materials above 5,000 square meters per gram. That's one football field worth of surface area in a sugar cube worth of material. So these are like really, really highly porous materials. Here, I want to show you a demo of the library, the Python library that I've built to do this task, this generative AI task. I'll share this with audio, and if you can't hear it, do let me know.
I will show you how we use matgfn to generate metal organic frameworks with high surface area. So we first import the required modules from matgfn. So we have the sequence environment, we have the trajectory balance GFlowNet, and we have an LSTM flow model. We also have the utility class pormake structure builder that helps generate metal organic frameworks and covalent organic frameworks using the pormake package. We initialize a pormake structure builder with a certain topology string. Here we do FFC. We include edges and we choose a RMSD cutoff. This means that in each slot of the topology, we will only add blocks which are less than 0.1 angstroms from the size of that block. So we only add compatible blocks in that slot. In this topology, with all of the building blocks in the PoreMake library, we have over 12 billion potential candidates. So this is a very large space for the GFlowNet to explore. We can check whether we generate valid reticular materials by calling a random sequence and by calling make structure for that sequence. So here is how one such random material looks like, the unit cell of such random material looks like. And you can see this is well connected. This looks like a valid reticular material. Here's another one. There we go. So this looks valid as well. Now we create a reward. The way that this reward is created is as follows. We get a sequence of building blocks and we write that sequence as a CIF file in a temporary folder. We then run the network command. This is the Zeo++ software that calculates the accessible surface area. Then we read the output of that software, we get the total surface area, and we create a reward. That reward is the total surface area minus a cutoff divided by the cutoff. Here, the cutoff is 5,000 square meters per gram of material. Okay. Once we have this reward class, we instantiate it. So cutoff equals 5,000, temporary dir equals scratch. We can see it working by creating a random sequence and giving it a reward. So this is the sequence of building blocks, 3 node building blocks and 3 edge building blocks, and this is the reward. Here's another one, and here's another one with a reward of 0, meaning that the surface area is below the cutoff. Then we instantiate a sequence environment. This gets a token vocabulary, so this is all of the building blocks that can be added in the sequence. It gets a termination token. All of these are instantiated in Builder. It gets a reward function, which is a very simple lambda here. It also gets a mask. What that mask does is for every partially generated sequence, it tells the GFlowNet what are valid next building blocks. And it also gets a minimum sequence length and the maximum sequence length. Here, it's the number of slots in Builder. We instantiate a flow model. In this case, it's an LSTM and our trajectory balance GFlowNet. We train it. Then, by calling fit, we first make all of the weights changeable and all of the gradients turn on. Here, the training is only for a few episodes for the purpose of the demo. You can see the log z here increasing a little bit, and also this is the loss, which is pretty small. I will interrupt this now. And then do an eval. And we get our trained observations. This network has not been trained for long, so we don't expect these to be a very good sample. But after we get the loss lower, we will get samples such as the ones reported in our paper. So this finishes the demo. Thank you.
So with that, the demo finishes, and I will show you some of the results of the generated materials. Vitaly, is the audio okay?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So, as I've shown in a previous notebook, we've trained the GFlowNets and we've generated about 1 million candidates. Here, I plot the top 100,000 in gray and the top 100 in orange materials from what they call the matgfn-rm dataset of generated materials. In green, we have the materials in the ARC-MOF dataset, which is one of the reference datasets for metal organic frameworks. For plotting, we used the AMD invariant that Vitaly here and the team invented. This is very good because it allowed us to compute the features of all of the materials very quickly. And the conclusion that I draw from this figure is that the dataset is novel compared to the ARC-MOF dataset, which is a collection of essentially all of the metal organic frameworks that are known so far. So using GFlowNets and using this generation technique, we could generate new materials. Also, the top 100 materials, which are in orange, are further apart from the ARC-MOF dataset than the gray materials. So we see a larger separation for the top 100 materials in terms of surface area than the top 100,000 materials. We've also assessed the performance of these materials in terms of CO2 working capacity, which we know correlates with the surface area, and also CO2 N2 selectivity. So how much more CO2 it captures than nitrogen. The red line is the top CO2 working capacity in another reference data set, Core 2019. This is surpassed by 15 of the top 100 materials that we generate. So we generate novel materials and we also generate high performance materials. The CO2 selectivity is relatively poor for these materials, but it makes sense because this was not a generation target. We also worked in a separate paper to try to understand some explainable rules of the performance of the best performance materials. I'll just very quickly talk about this, but we invented a symbolic learning algorithm that categorizes materials between excellent, good, moderate, and poor, and learns what properties, such as cell volume, density, are good in order to label these materials as excellent, good, moderate, and poor. And this method performs better than, say, Bayesian optimization in order to select materials from a data set. So this is just an aside of some work that will hopefully converge in the future. Finally, this is a render of the best material in the data set that shows a pore size in the middle of about 87 angstroms and a gravimetric surface area of about 10,000 square meters per gram, as compared to around 5,000 of some of the materials that are in the reference data set. These are some of the building blocks. This is actually technically a covalent organic framework rather than a metal organic framework, since all of the building blocks here, so we have two square building blocks, we have a triangular building block, and we have two linkers. All of these are organic molecules rather than molecules which have metal atoms. So finally, I will conclude and we can talk a little bit about some of the next steps. So here, we've managed to use GFlowNets to design new reticular materials for carbon capture. They are novel, they have high performance. And in the future, I'd like to continue building on this to improve the rewards. So as you can see, for example, the CO2 and N2 selectivity isn't that good. So we'd like to use that, or we'd like to use some process metrics. For example, there's a thing called the general evaluation metric, which shows how good this material is at capturing CO2 in an actual power plant, and move as quickly as possible to work with some experimentalists to build a sort of prototype of a self-driving lab. So where GFlowNet suggests some materials, and they are tested in the laboratory, and we aim to optimize and sample for a proxy of the actual lab measurement. So thank you so much for listening. If you want to read some of these papers, you can follow these links or scan these QR codes. And I look forward to open for discussions and for questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Flaviu. Let us thank Flaviu for the nice presentation, please. Yeah, physically or virtually. So usually meet only virtually. So today we are accidentally sitting across the table, but our seminar is usually online. Okay, so there are certainly experts in in our audience today about crystal GFlowNets. So please, any questions for Flaviu?
So maybe, maybe I have one. I have a couple actually. One.
Yet. Maybe it's from your side. I don't know.
Alex,
you cannot hear me? Can you hear me now?
could you try again, please?
Yeah, I'm trying again. Can you hear me now? No? Ah, okay. So some people can hear me, but not everybody.
Sorry, it wasn't my side.
Okay.
Flaviu, can you hear me?
Yes.
Flaviu, you can hear me well?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Excellent.
Then I'll go ahead and ask my questions. Well, one question is just whether the code, this matgfn that you have developed and the dataset are available. I tried to find it, but I couldn't. So I was wondering if it's available. And then more of a more scientific question. I was wondering if you could tell us more about the building blocks that are part of the sequences and how you made the decision of selecting those for the GFlowNet action space, etc. I'm curious about those details.
So regarding open sourcing, I'm working right now to get the open source or the code open sourced, and I plan to have it open sourced by the AI for Materials workshop at NeurIPS. So all of what I presented will be open sourced. In terms of the building blocks, so action space. The next action is okay. Let's start with building blocks. pormig is the software that allows you to build meta-organic frameworks and reticular materials. pormig has a database of building blocks. They are node building blocks and edge building blocks. Each building block has a number of connection points from 2 to maybe 6. The GFlowNet generates a sequence. So at every step, it chooses a building block to append to a sequence. And it only chooses the building blocks which can, quote unquote, fit into the slot. We define fit into the slot by the RMSD. So the building block is of RMSD less than, in the paper we reported 0.3. So less than 0.3, then the available slot in that topology. And finally, there's the termination action. We enforce the building blocks which aren't valid get removed by using a mask. So the flow model outputs the logits, and we just mask the actions which correspond to building blocks that shouldn't be there. Does that make sense, or do you have any follow-ups to this?
No, it makes all the sense. Thank you very much. I just need to, I'm not an expert in the specifics of of meta-organic framework. I'm more on the GFlowNet side. So I will need to check this library of building blocks to understand better. But yeah, that sheds already a lot of light. Just maybe if a follow-up question, a quick one, if I may. So in the demo that you showed, the trajectories are like, I can't remember, but like something on 5-6 blocks or so. Is that the average number of steps in the trajectories, or?
Yes, there's about maybe 5-6 blocks. There are some topologies which have about 10, but that's about the size of the trajectory.
I see. Okay, thank you so much for the answers.
And great to meet you, by the way. I love some of the papers that you've written on GFlowNets. I've been reading them as I learned about the architecture.
Thanks. Nice to meet you too, and hopefully we'll meet in at NeurIPS at the AI for Materials workshop.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Okay, so thank you, Alex, for your questions. Questions from other participants, please. Okay, to encourage more questions, if you could go back to the slides where you probably compare, or did you say you've got novel materials.
This one?
Probably. So this is the plot projection from Tisney by using AMD vectors, right?
AMD vectors of length 100, yes.
And maybe on a different slide you mentioned RMSD.
The slide related where I mentioned RMSD was in the demo. There we only choose building blocks which have an RMSD smaller than 0.3 to the slot they could fit in. So a topology, say the FFC topology, has 5 slots. And we have to choose a building block to put into each of these slots. And a slot, say, is a square. And is a square of a certain size. So we have the geometry of that slot. We compare the building blocks with the geometry of that slot using the RMSD. But it's also the RMSD, so you kind of like rotate the building block up until you get like the minimum RMSD with the slot. Does that make sense?
So could I check my understanding? This RMSD is your implementation.
It's the PoreMake implementation. PoreMake is the Python library that we use to generate these materials.
Yeah, because material scientists or crystallographers by RMSD usually new implementation in Mercury maintained by a Cambridge crystallographic data center, but lots of different. So this RMSD you're using is different one.
It's a different one. It's the RMSD implemented in PoreMake.
PoreMake. Do you know if it is restricted to a unit cell or how a finite portion is chosen?
It's a comparison between two. It's not a periodic one. It's a comparison between like 5 atoms which define your slot and the 20 atoms, say, that define your molecule that you want to put in that slot. It's kind of like, imagine you have like a hole in a sheet, and you want to fit a cube into that hole. You want to make sense. You want to make sure that you only put cubes which are the same size as the hole.
Okay. Yeah, certainly it's a different similarity measure. Okay. Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Flaviu. Any more questions for Flaviu? Actually, let me stop the recording.